Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 8. My guest for this episode is composer Jay Coles. But before we begin, I need to ask a favor. If you enjoy this podcast, would you please go to iTunes and give it a rating? This will help spread the word and bring the show to more listeners. Okay. Hi, Jay. How are you?
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jay, I'd like you to introduce yourself. Tell the audience who you are.
Sure. My name's Jay Coles. I am a composer, conductor, clinician, residing in Indianapolis, Indiana right now, and I'm also a college senior.
And where do you go to school, Jay?
Oh, at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.
You are a young composer. You have 2 published pieces last year.
Mm-hmm.
One with Carl Fischer and one with Barnhouse, and then 2 more coming out this summer, one with C. Allen and one with Barnhouse.
Yes.
And so this is great, and I'm really excited to have you on to talk about this. And so how about early on, what's your instrument?
Euphonium/bassoon.
Euphonium/bassoon was one for marching and one for concert?
Yes.
I see, and which was first?
Euphonium actually came first.
And which do you enjoy more, actually?
I'd say bassoon. I enjoyed.
Now, is your major composition, or is it performance?
It's composition in English. Composition in English.
Right, because there's another aspect to you that our band listeners probably don't know.
Yeah.
And that's you are a soon-to-be published author.
Yes, I am. I have a book coming out in the spring of 2018 called Tyler Johnson Was Here. It's going to be published by Little Brown for young readers. So I'm very excited for that.
That's awesome. So you're multi-talented, a renaissance man.
Thank you.
All right, so how did you get into music originally?
Yeah, so in elementary school, I took a class. Maybe it was 4th or 5th grade, but I took a class on music. It was we played like recorders, so little cheap little plastic things, and I really enjoyed, being able to play music with my peers and being able to like play these cool arrangements that our music director sort of wrote for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't until my 5th or 6th grade year where we had the band director from the middle school come over and sort of show us all of these cool instruments, cool shiny brass instruments and woodwinds and everything, and even percussion. And I just remember being very fascinated with everything. It's like, I didn't grow up in a very musical household, so like seeing all these cool instruments felt like I was in this brave new world of cool things. And so I started picking up the trumpet, the clarinet, the flute. I tried to play everything, and I just sucked, obviously, being a beginner. But the euphonium was something that I really, really struck me. The middle school director, taught me how to play the euphonium well enough. And eventually, when I got to middle school, I chose euphonium to be like my primary instrument. I chose to be in band. And for like my first year in middle school, I just kind of never really practiced. I felt like I was one of the worst people in the band, but my band director always persisted in like letting me know that I was doing well, that I was improving. He let my parents know that they did a good job for encouraging me to actually go along with music, and I'm grateful for that. Even actually become one of my greatest mentors.
Mm-hmm.
And then all throughout middle school, I became sort of the star of the band, if you will. Like my band director would always brag to my parents about me being the star of the band and being the star of the euphonium section, especially because we'd have these playing tests, and these playing tests would involve like little passages of the music that we'd play. Like we'd play some Robert W. Smith, and we'd play some Brian Balmages or Sean O'Loughlin. So these cool composers that I'm like super idolizing even today. So we play these little passages, and I'd always like try to do my best to like outshine everyone, just because like I was a snob because I thought that I was so cool. And then in high school, I sort of carried with band, but I switched to bassoon just because I wanted to challenge myself. Instead of switching into another brass instrument, I was like, how about I go, try a woodwind? And bassoon just had always like interested me. I loved the sound of it. I loved the keys and the way that you hold it. And so from there, I joined marching band and played euphonium marching band, bassoon concert band, and now I'm still playing both in college. So,
Well, they have similar parts.
Yeah, they have similar parts, and that's kind of how I became a composer, actually. Because I always got really tired of the low brass part. I felt like it was always bland. It was always the same. It was always, whole notes or half notes or quarter notes, and I was like, man, I need to like arrange this part, for my section or for myself. And so like that's what I do. Like I take some of the music that we'd be playing in both middle school and high school and just take it home and arrange it. So the bassoon or the euphonium part would be cooler, in my opinion at least. And I from there I started to like write different melodies, and I was commissioned by my middle school band director to write a bassoon trio for solo and ensemble. And so it was just like, I don't know, it just felt like very natural for me to fall into composing just based off of like arranging parts that I didn't like.
Well, I love that story. I love the idea that you saw a need for yourself, or you saw something that you wanted to do, and then you just took that on as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that became a career. Just really quickly to get some background, what town or what city are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, and so I've lived there all of my life until I've come to college in Muncie. So,
all right, Jay. So you're from Indianapolis, and you mentioned to me before we began recording that you had your first big break as a composer happened when you were very young, with a Japanese conductor. Can you tell me that story one more time?
Yeah. So as I was telling you, this was in 2011, I believe, or maybe sooner, maybe earlier. Facebook and like Twitter have been like always huge platforms for me. And so there was one day I was scrolling on Facebook and I was posting different links to SoundCloud files or MP3 files of like pieces of music that I was working on. And a director from Japan, Mr. Masago Hirokazu, reached out to me to like write a piece for his ensemble. He teaches at Kirinkai High School. It's actually an all-girls school, I believe. In Japan, he commissioned me to write a grade 5 6-minute piece, which is called Orchestras Legends of Thailand, which features bassoon, euphonium, clarinet. There's some solos in there. There's some really cool percussion elements going on. But that was sort of my first big break into music composition. It was the first time that I actually heard my music performed live by a living ensemble and not from like a trash MIDI file.
Yeah, that's a big moment.
Yeah. And so it was all very surreal, especially like me being in middle school at the time when this happened. So it was just like really, really insane. But he actually wanted me to come out to Japan to work with his ensemble as a middle school student. But unfortunately, like it being in the middle school year, I couldn't go. But it was still nice to have that recording sent to me.
Sure.
Actually, he sent the recording to me on my birthday, which
That's
is
awesome.
Very awesome.
So you were 11 or 12, so you were younger than most of the girls in the high school band.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really incredible, Jay. I'm just so impressed with your young career and can't wait to see what else is coming.
Thank you.
So is writing for concert band and wind ensemble the primary focus of your composition?
Yes. I started out arranging for like small chamber groups, just so like me and my friends can like play trios or quartets or whatever. And then I shifted to band being the primary ensemble that I write for. And nowadays, it still remains like pretty much like the sole group that I write for, mostly especially for commercial publication. But I still write on my own, like with choir or orchestra or small chamber groups that no one will ever hear. So,
well, you must be composing for your degree.
That too. And that's mostly a lot of chamber stuff and a lot of orchestral work. But again, like I don't think outside of like the college academic sphere, it might not be heard.
Well, I think you're having some success with the band. You feel very comfortable in that idiom. I don't know if you're gonna do the other stuff, but I mean that'll come too.
I actually was talking with Larry Clark, who is one of my publishers over at Carl Fischer, and we were talking about actually getting some string works into publication very soon. I don't really know a lot about strings, even though I've taken some classes on it. I don't know a whole lot. I have to actually hold a string instrument at some point. But I think eventually I would love to like break out into writing, for high school, middle school string groups. And I think that's a very, very, very cool sort of ensemble to even write for. Like some of my favorite composers, like Brian Balmage's Sunhee Newbold, Yokiko Nishimura, have some incredible string music that I just really love. And I'd love to give it a try.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about that you're an author also, and we mentioned your book.
Yep.
So how do you identify? Do you identify as a musician or as an author or as both?
I kind of identify as both. And depending on who like I talk to, sometimes it's like one or the other. Because, I don't know, there's this stigma on both musicians and authors as being, I don't know, there's some sort of like preconceived notions that come with both. And so it really depends on like who you're talking to, who I'm talking to. Like when I'm talking with you, I feel comfortable saying, hey, yeah, I'm an author and a musician, composer, conductor, and all these other things. But like when I'm talking with someone like maybe Larry Clark or, Andy Glover, maybe I feel the need to identify more, as that musician or composer to them.
Sure. Well, I think it's amazing. So I guess what I want to ask is, because you're still in school at Ball State, and so do you have a sense, given these two things, what's next for you?
Yeah, I feel like, because I originally was studying to be a music teacher, and then I was switched over to be an English teacher, and then I switched to be a general teacher. But at this point, I feel like I can make an impact on both the education industry, both the music industry, and the publishing book industry in a different way outside of just teaching. And you can teach in like different mediums other than like standing in a classroom and like teaching that way, which I've had to learn over the years. And I think even like making an impact on students and like young people, young adults and young musicians, I can do that in different ways. And I think for me, what it looks like is kind of doing what I'm doing now, is like doing both on the side while also like pursuing other hobbies that I have. And like with both my book career and my music career, I'm able to like travel to different schools, different parts of the country, maybe in parts of the world at some point, to work with ensembles that way, through adjudication and clinics, even going to like places like Midwest or IMEA to like make an impact that way. I think mostly for me in the future, that's probably what it's going to look like. Just doing a lot of clinics and like being part of the background sort of aspect of the composition process and the book process, just so you can actually see the true impact that my craft has on young people, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So you hope to do this full time? Yes,
I hope to do that full time.
Okay. So you mentioned clinics, and so what kind of conducting experience? How much have you done so far?
Yeah, I've not done a whole lot, but I've done enough to feel comfortable with being invited to different schools. So mostly just local ensembles within Indiana and Indianapolis specifically. I've worked with a couple of my old middle schools, a couple of high schools in Indiana, and just mostly just doing small clinics with like different sections. Like I've worked with the euphonium section at a middle school for a day, the student section before. I've also commissioned my middle school band commissioned me last year to write a piece. Actually, Dystopia, they commissioned that piece for their 7th grade ensemble. And I worked with them on that last year before it got published with C. Allen. And that's sort of what it's been looking like for me. Just like when I am commissioned, I sort of make the initiative to make a trip to that school to sort of, do work with the ensemble, with the director that way. In fact, I have a very booked commission schedule at the moment. One big commission that ties in with my book is there's a school in Missouri. Actually, no, it's Minnesota. Sorry, Spring Lake Park High School. Brian and Nora commissioned me to write a piece inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and sort of like the political climate that we have right now. And it's sort of like a tie-in to like my book that is coming out in the spring of next year. It's a grade 4-5 piece. It's a lyrical piece, and sort of what that looks like is along the way I've sent them like clips of like how I want the piece to be portrayed, how the emotional expression should be to the director and the students. I've taken a lot of feedback from them and internalized that to like continue writing the piece. And they've actually am flying me out in a couple weeks to do a clinic with them. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, it's just been like, I don't know, the opportunities have found me.
You know, we make our own luck. Is that Arnold Palmer or Jack Nicklaus? One of the golfers said that, right? The harder I work, the luckier I get. Well, this is really fascinating. Is Spring Lake the high school that made the news recently?
Yeah, they were featured in NPR.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. They were featured in NPR for this sort of aspect of a push for diversity in the music sphere and the band world and the orchestra world, etc. And what has been really wonderful with Spring Lake Park is how they've dedicated their upcoming programs to featuring marginalized and oppressed composers.
Mm-hmm.
So composers who are women and composers who are Black or Hispanic or Asian, composers who have different religious backgrounds other than, Christianity. And they've reached out to me to be a part of that movement, which I'm extremely honored and extremely grateful to be a part of. In the past, they've had Viet Quang and Travis Cross and Omar Thomas, some very well-known composers like in the band world work with their ensemble for this sort of movement. And I think what we're noticing in the education sort of band community right now is this sort of, on one side, there's this push for diversity within music, as in like having ensembles play music of people that may look like them or may not look like them, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
And going back to like my own middle school and high school experience, like we played, every piece that we played pretty much was by a white male, like every concert. It felt natural to me, because I didn't know any better. But like growing up, I really understood like how much I missed out on, how much music could have like impacted me sooner even if I had saw myself like in the music that we were playing. And so I guess that's also like another component that has gotten me into composing now is so I can also like be that voice for younger composers who are Black or Hispanic or who feel like they may not have a voice or a way to express their own thoughts or feelings within their music because they don't see themselves in the industry or they don't see themselves like in the top publishing houses.
I think it's terrific that you're having this success, Jay.
Thank you.
I think genuinely you write great music and have a really strong sort of individual voice for this.
Thank you.
I hope that came out all right.
yeah, you're good. And I'm just really grateful that, there have been allies like yourself who have stood by this sort of push for diversity within the band community, because I think that's really essential. Like if we don't have this sort of allyship, then it's going to fail. Yeah,
it's not a zero-sum game, and I talked about this with several people that I've interviewed. There's this belief that there's like sort of a pie that's finite, but really, it's to mix metaphors again. It's, a rising tide lifts all boats, and there's plenty to go around for everybody, and we need more voices, not less voices.
Mm-hmm. More voices. Yeah, and the other side of that, though, is there's, like I was saying, there's still this resistance from this piece of the band community of like, this political aspect of like, oh, this isn't right because it makes it seem like my music is lesser, or I'm not going to get as many performances as this Black composer or whatever, And so that has been really hard to deal with and sort of like work through, but I think that's a natural response.
I think some of it's that sort of like that gut visceral reaction, any sort of competition.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say more because I'm not going to speak for other people. But, for me, sometimes I'll see something and I'll go, oh, but wait. But then my intellect, my sort of like, my morals take over and it's not just a reaction.
Yeah. And I've even had like a similar reaction from band directors. Like I've had band directors like email me saying, I saw your post on diversity. If you're going to keep like pushing for diversity or forcing diversity within the music industry, then I'm not going to play your music anymore. And so it's been hard for me to like really keep that balance, of like, wanting to express concerns that I have within the publishing community, both in books and music, trying to stay sort of on the good side of everybody.
From my perspective is you have to be honest to who you are, and people will respect honesty, and if they like you, they're going to buy your music, and you're going to have a bigger following. If you're dishonest to try to please people who aren't predisposed to like you, then
Yeah.
you're cutting off. I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Just be you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I mean, I don't have any answers here, Jay, obviously. Yeah. But I can just offer what I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry?
I'm very grateful. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm just saying I'm very grateful that, at least we're having the conversation now. And in fact, Nathan Daughtry over at C. Allen, we were having this conversation the other day. I think on Monday we were having this conversation together. He was saying, I just really enjoy the work that you're doing. He was saying that this conversation needs to happen even on a larger scale within, the big five sort of music publishers, because I think when you look at their catalog, you see some real racial disparities there, and even gender disparities, where you see a lot of those top composers who are heavily promoted by these publishing houses are white men, and composers who are diverse to some extent, are pushed into the margins and have to sort of find a way into the publishing house, on their own, even if that means self-publishing. But
yeah, some of these problems, of course, are systemic.
And I was having this conversation with Nathan because this last summer, before I even started talking to him about doing a publishing contract with him and everything, Nathan and I were talking about sort of this very systemic issues that are happening in the publishing houses, and he approached me and he went, how can we fix this? Which I appreciated that, he actually wanted to have that conversation. And we spent a while talking about, well, there needs to be, there are a lot of ways in which we can lift up the marginalized within the music industry that we don't really seek to do. And I think one way that's huge that publishing houses can do that through is simple composition contests, dedicated for marginalized voices. Because we have a lot of that in the book world, but I don't really see that in the music world. And it's been really interesting over the years to really compare both the music industry and the book industry and see how behind sort of we are in the music world.
Okay, Jay, so I really admire your push for diversity and what you represent as a composer. So what advice would you give to maybe high school directors or middle school directors when they're programming their concerts?
Yeah. My main advice for directors across the board, high school and middle school, even at the collegiate level, is just to make sure that the music that you're playing is reflective of your band or your ensemble. I think it's very important that whatever music that you're choosing to perform for a program has some sort of aspect in which you can tie in some sort of lesson on, race or gender, or without it getting political, without it getting really messy. I think having a diverse sort of catalog, a diverse sort of program will ensure maximum success and ensure maximum potential in students. I think even going from my own personal experience, I feel if I were allowed to have music or play music by composers who were, Black, and composers who were from a different racial background, and there was a story to tell within that music, I would have fell in love with band far sooner. I would have fell in love with the aspect of composition far sooner, because one aspect in which a lot of members of oppressed groups sort of fall behind, and is when we feel contained in boxes, and when we feel it's always catering to the norm or catering to the same sort of five top composers, we feel pushed off into the margins. And so I think a great way to go about overcoming that so students won't fall behind is just to make sure that you're being intentional with the music that you're choosing, being intentional with saying, okay, I'm going to choose this piece because there's a story to tell like behind this music that my students should really know about.
Right. All right, Jay. So are you self-published? I know you're commercially published, but how much self-publishing are you doing? Any?
Right now, I'm doing very little self-publishing. I have like maybe 2 or 3 tunes that are like self-published right now, but mostly commercial.
And so what are the advantages for you at this point of being commercially published?
Mostly at the moment, just the publicity. It's been really helpful to get my music out there through, the publishers that I am part of. Like, being a self-published composer as well, I can't really market myself at Midwest or, some of these other conferences just being a self-published composer who is like my age. But I think sort of that aspect of being commercially published certainly helps with like getting my name out there and getting my music out there. That sort of helps my self-published works as well.
There's a trade-off. To be commercially published, you're trading the rights to your music.
Mm-hmm.
You're trading a large cut of the royalties, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And but what you get in return is the publicity, and there's no question that helps a great deal. And so, yeah. So you want to talk about how you sort of came to be published for the first piece?
Yeah. So I've been sending music out to music publishers since I was in middle school.
Wow.
Ever since I wrote the piece, Orchesis, that I was telling you about that was premiered in Japan. And I started writing these really difficult grade 5, grade 6, works that like the big publishers were like, this is too hard for us to publish, and actually being able to, publicize and everything.
Yeah.
I started writing some grade 1s, grade 2s, and just received a lot of rejections, how, like part of life, part of being a, creator of, music or literature or whatever is rejection and facing that rejection. And it wasn't until the ending of my high school career, actually the middle of my high school career, where I got connected with Larry Clark, my friend composer Ryan Main, my friend composer Tyler S. Grant, where they sort of became my mentors in the sort of aspect of improving my music so it was publishable. Because I would write these really ridiculous, like, low brass parts. So these really basic, really simple, like, woodwind, flute, melodies.
Yeah.
So that's not, publishable commercially.
Sure.
And so, like, it took a lot of mentoring from Larry Clark and Ryan Main and Tyler S. Grant to really help me become the composer that I am today. And it wasn't until college where Larry Clark really accepted my first tune into publication, and really established that relationship as like a composer with Carl Fischer.
And so that was Galactic Episode.
That was Galactic Episode. It's a grade 2.
And at the same time, you had a piece taken by Barnhouse, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it just goes to show, there's so much rejection and there's such a big learning curve to this, and so you just be persistent. If you're someone out there who's writing band music, look at models, look at pieces that are successful, see what they're doing, try to emulate that within your own style, and then just be persistent.
Right, and that's one of my biggest like pieces of advice. Like when I go to schools and I talk with students who like are interested in composition, that's one of the biggest things that I mention is like it's important to know that it's okay to, consume all of the music that you possibly can in the genre that you're trying to write in.
Absolutely.
When I'm trying to write like this commission that I was telling you about at Spring Lake Park, like it's a grade 5 or grade 4 range. What I'm doing is like I'm consuming a lot of like, harder level band music to see like what sort of styles, sort of inspire me to like create my own sort of like, aspect to like the piece that I'm writing. And that's sort of like been really helpful in creating the piece that I'm writing now. And just even with Galactic Episode and a lot of the pieces that I have commercially published, it's been like me just listening to a lot of music that are released by Carl Fischer and Barnhouse and C. Allen and seeing like sort of what are the trends, what are some of the cool techniques that are being used and how can I emulate this to like and make it my own.
Yeah. So what would you say makes your music yours? What is your style, Jay? That's an impossible question, I know, but
yeah, I think, okay, well, here's a couple things that I'll say. I think I try to write interesting parts for low brass because, like I was saying, like growing up in middle school and high school playing, these cool pieces by all these wonderful composers that I really admire. The parts that we play, felt very simplistic and boring sometimes. And so I think what I would consider myself to be, known for, or what I sort of admire about my own work musically, is just like how I've sort of like learned from that and sort of made the sort of like aspect of the euphonium part, the entire low brass and the low woodwinds, sort of like my own sort of style with not whole notes, if that makes any sense.
Okay, yeah, from my perspective, your music is very dramatic. It reminds me, well, it has a narrative.
Yeah.
And so you're also an author. This brought this up a couple times. And can you talk about that, the publishing process for being an author versus being a composer?
Yeah.
I was going to say, as a composer, that the process is simply that you send pieces to the companies within their parameters, and then they get back to you or not, and then sometimes they'll work with you, sometimes they won't. But literary publication is very different.
It's very different, but they're both like equally as stressful at times. So yeah, obviously with music publication, it's just a lot of sending out emails or filling out forms online to like submit your music, and it's like you wait and wait to hear back, and sometimes they say no, sometimes they say yes, but like here are a list of edits to make before we accept it, and then from there it becomes kind of smoother. And on the other side with books, it's different because you have an agent who is sort of the one that sends out your work, and you're not the one that deals with a lot of the rejection. So the agent is sort of the one that ends up is consuming all of the rejection or some of the rejection.
I see.
But also the person who's mediating the contracts,
Mm-hmm.
and also the person who's negotiating the deal, the book deal.
Yep.
And a lot of times, if you're lucky enough, you get a book advance. So you get money up front for your book being accepted, and that's something that I really wish music publishers would adapt to. But it's similar in the regard of like there's a lot of rejection, there's a lot of like waiting, but it's very different in the aspect of like technical stuff, like who sees what,
Yeah.
And I don't know like how a lot of the major music publishers deal with like accepting music, but for a lot of book publishers, it's a lot of committee meetings. So they sit in large rooms and they talk about whatever book that's being pitched, and they sort of vote on whether or not they want to accept that into their publishing house or not.
Right. I think some of the music publishers have a similar process. I know that when I submitted my works to Grand Mesa, that Walter Cummings at Grand Mesa, they meet. He accepts sort of like a list of works that he thinks might be potential, and then they meet twice a year and make some decisions. So I think some do that.
Okay, awesome.
So about the agent, it's very unusual in music for a composer to have an agent, at least in classical music. So how does that work? Do you have to pay her up front, or does that come out of your royalties, or do you mind me asking?
No. So I had in order to get my agent that I have now, her name's Lauren Abramo. She's at the Distill Goderic and Burett Larry Management. I just had to like pitch her my book, and she loved the idea. She got back to me within a couple weeks, and we did like 2 months of revisions on the book before she sent it out into publishers to see who would want it. But as far as like payment, I don't pay her up front. What would happen is once I get my advance and once I get my book royalties, she takes a percentage. I think it's like 15% or something. So
I see. Okay. That's really interesting. So now she actually worked with you on the edits, not an editor at a publishing house.
Initially, she was the one who worked with the edits with me. Then once it got accepted into the publishing house, then I worked with an editor.
Okay, that's really fascinating. I just never knew anything about that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to music. Our audience is probably going, I thought we were talking about band. All right, so now what's your process for writing a new work? Let's say I come to you and say, "Hey Jay, I'm Mark Connor. I teach at so and so middle school. I'd like a piece for grade 2."
Yeah, my process sort of looks like I try to involve the director as much as possible within any commission. So a lot of times it ends up being just a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and I ask for like particular style requests, particular lengths. I also ask for student feedback. I'm very big on getting student feedback because, again, I want the music that I write to be reflective of like their interests and reflective of like what experiences that they've had. And so it's just a lot of like communication throughout the process. And then once I actually go in to writing the work, it's just a lot of, having laid out all of these points that I've received from the students and the directors, but also making sure that I'm still having creative control over like sort of like what I'm writing. In fact, with the commission that I'm working on now with Spring Lake Park, they sent me a list over of like a bunch of ideas for the commission. They were like, let's do a very fast dramatic work, like John Mackey style. And then it had some students that were like, I want a very pretty piece, that's really slow, and I want to cry. And so it's been it's really interesting to, be able to see like what these different entities, so whether it's student body, whether it's a director or myself, like what are our visions for the piece, and how can I piece together pieces so we can all meet in the middle, sort of, and make it a collaboration.
All right, so you're a young composer yourself. What general advice would you give to other composers who are maybe your age or slightly younger?
Yeah, I'd say certainly never give up and be persistent. Rejection is hard, but I think it's important to always be, on your feet and be sort of striving to your highest potential in regards to like pursuing your dreams. For me, it looked like the odds were built against me, like when I was initially submitting music, initially composing. But I think over time, like I've seen like me constantly pursuing my dreams, me constantly pursuing what I wanted out of my music career helped me, learn the success that I have now. So I think it's just the matter of like constantly being persistent, constantly reminding yourself of why you're doing what you're doing. Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for creative expression? Are you doing it just to like fit a trend? And I think evaluating yourself and like that sort of like introspection aspect will always be key into ensuring like your success. So
yeah, that's good advice.
Thank you.
You have to believe in yourself. And imposter syndrome and the belief that maybe you're not good enough is really powerful for creative people. And you have to be persistent, and you have to believe in that what you have has value to someone. And so I really like the way your never give up resonates with the central advice I give. Okay, Jay, so what's your favorite work for Wind Ensemble?
I am a huge fan of Michael Markowski. Like everything that he writes, I love. My favorite would probably be Saturn Returns by Michael Markowski. But I'm also a huge fan of like Raise the Roof by Michael Tottery. Have you heard that piece?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I encourage you to listen to it. It's a phenomenal piece that I'd love to be able to like write like one day. But it's one of my favorites.
I'll go listen to it as soon as we're done.
Yeah. Also, I like a lot of Dmitri Shostakovich works for Wind Band.
The transcriptions, or?
Yeah, a lot of them are transcriptions, but especially I think it's called Fire of the Eternal. Yeah, I love that one.
Okay, so Jay, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Again, just like I have a couple pieces coming out this summer. One with C. Allen Publications, and the other with C.L. Barnhouse. The C.L. Barnhouse piece will be a grade 2.5. Very dramatic work, very percussive. There's a lot of percussion going on. I played around with some bongos and tom-toms and some very cool native sounding drums. And then, again, like just to plug my book one more time, it's my book, Tyler Jones Was Here, is coming out spring of 2018. And I hope that everyone checks it out.
I'll link that in the show notes, or at least I'll put the title.
Awesome.
And make sure that people know about that. And it's a book. Yeah. It's a book about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, it's a book inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement.
I didn't really ask you for a synopsis. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I could share a brief synopsis. So Tyler Johnson Was Here is a young adult fiction novel based off of some real life experiences, but it's purely fiction. It's about a boy named Marvin whose twin brother Tyler goes missing after attending a very risky party. They're high school seniors, so they attend this very risky party. And so Marvin's twin brother Tyler goes missing, and Marvin has to uncover the truth as to where Tyler really is, what really happened, what really made him go missing. And by the end, you find a really chilling truth about Tyler and his death, and the sort of aspect of police brutality that sort of opens up the conversation of what the Black Lives Matter movement really stands for.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited for that one to come out.
It sounds like a powerful story.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm really happy that you said yes to doing this, and we had a little bit of miscommunication, but we got it done in the end. So
very glad we got it done.
Absolutely, Jay. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.